If I'm reading this right, and I'd like to think I am, then the spell required to split you all apart is going to take just crazy levels of power. Steve and the other members of Doom were in his lab as he worked to decipher the writing of the old scribe that they'd recovered from the library that they'd liberated from the Philosophers. "What do you mean, us all? There's just two of us," Fenrina mentioned as she nosed around some of the reagents and ingredients that Steve had stashed around his lab for experiments. Larry was in the corner grooming his pet rooster with some special feather shampoo that Steve had made. Sherry, meanwhile, was running a few experiments on the strange powder they'd also taken from the Philosophers. "If I'm doing this, I'm going to do it to everyone that blood mage hit. I don't want to do this over a few thousand times. Besides, from what I can tell, just doing it once is what takes up most of the power. Expanding the spell over more bodies isn't as much of a drain, so it's most efficient to get everyone all at once," Steve explained as he slowly read the scrolls and kept checking his nearby dictionaries. He had to translate some of the text from Emajigglepiece to Old Ethelique, and then into Common, which was making it a slow process. "How are you even going to find everyone else?" Fenrina asked, as she opened a drawer and then quickly shut it as the inhabitant tried to pinch her nose. "The Archon is helping me with it. She's working up some sort of tracking and recovery spell while I work at this." Steve slowly turned the scroll sideways, then upside down, and then back around, as he tried to make sense out of a few of the drawings. It didn't help that the scholar's handwriting was terrible, or that half the passages were about how hot the Pharaoh's daughters were. "It'll be nice to meet some of my old friends again," Fenrina chirped up happily then at the thought. "I thought your whole tribe except Astrid had been wiped out," Sherry asked as she mixed some of the powder in with ice, milk, strawberries, and bananas in accordance with one of the Philosopher alchemic recipes, though neither she nor Steve could figure out how that was supposed to make any sort of strength potion. "Yeah, but there were other tribes, you know. We used to all get together and sled around," Fenrina happily mentioned with a wag of her tail as she nearly knocked over some of Steve's expensive glass jars. "Sledding? But the Wastes didn't have many mountains to sled down," Steve muttered at first in confusion. "Oh wait, you mean you guys pulled the sleds, don't you?" He realized. "Yeah, what else would I mean?" the werehusky asked with a soft snort. Then she began to nose through another of the drawers after making sure nothing inside was going to try and eat her face. "Right. Well, to be honest, I'm not actually sure I'll be able to do this, not without some sort of crazy power. And the Archon already told me I can't use her for this since it's against that stupid treaty she has with the gods, and she also won't let me mess around with volcanoes on account of them blowing up. So, I'm stumped," he muttered and tapped on his chin. "What about blood magic? You said you can use it for not evil stuff, and I'm sure all the other husky people would totally volunteer," Fenrina suggested, as she rummaged around in a cupboard. "Wrong sort of magic. Blood magic fused you all together so it won't work to reverse it. Least, not without side effects," Steve replied with a sigh. "Hey, you've been holding out on me," Fenrina exclaimed as Steve watched her poke her head into one of the cupboards and then emerge with an bone in her mouth. Or more accurately, an entire arm's worth of bones all strung together by magic bonds, and rune carved into the bones themselves. Tingly," Fenrina muttered as she chewed on it, causing little sparks to flare up around her muzzle. "Hey, don't chew on that!" Steve shouted out, and Fenrina's ears went back as she faced him. "Fenrina, that's some ancient ruler's arm I looted off a necromancer before he could do anything nefarious with it. It's full of magic and super dangerous. If you break it, If you break it!" Steve trailed off even as Fenrina got ready to play, catch the werehusky with him, unaware that his mind had already changed gears. In that moment, Steve made a realization that would alter the course of Talaron forever. Then again, Steve did that almost every day. It's just that this particular realization was a bit bigger than the others, because this was when Spellslinger discovers fossil fuels. "It's back here!" Steve was leading the others through some of the more forgotten and less familiar halls of Arbitas as he searched for a particular artifact that he knew would help him with his new discovery. "So what's your idea again?" Sherry asked as she followed along, trying to keep Fenrina and Larry from wandering off into any of the other forbidden storage rooms. "I can use fossils to power the spell," Old fossils that are infused with magic are just jam-packed full of energy. If I can grind them down and mix them with some arcane water, the power potential is amazing, Steve eagerly explained as he navigated the labyrinthine corridors while checking his own map of the structure to find the room he needed. Wouldn't that make a compound that's highly unstable as well? It would be prone to combustion if I'm not mistaken, Sherry pointed out. Well, so long as you keep the combustion external, then it's fine. Steve dismissed quickly before finding the door he wanted. Here it is. He opened a door in the hall and waved the others forward. What about the sign? Sherry asked, as she pointed to a sign besides the door that said, Students Forbidden. This means you, Stephen! I'm not a student anymore. Besides, it's a sign, not faculty. Get in here, he insisted as he waved the others into a room full of old, dust-covered artifacts, objects, chests, and assorted other items. Steve quickly led them through the room to a globe at the back. This is the Tracker's globe. It can find anything you give it a sample of. With this, we can pinpoint the biggest concentration of fossils to use. Iotas Oua ent Iar? Fenrina asked as she kept chewing on the arm from earlier, making it twitch and shoot off more sparks. I told you to stop chewing on that, Steve huffed. And I'm not going to use the elephant graveyard because I'm not sure if the fish god corrupted them, and also all the dragon bones. If I start grinding up dragon bones, they're likely to get really pissed at me, and unlike the Archon, they're not keen to let people off with warnings. He tried to pry the fossil arm from her mouth, but considering she was both larger and stronger than him, he wasn't having an easy time of it as she growled and shook her head as she happily played tug-of-war with him over the rare and volatile skeletal arm. No take! She huffed around the bones in her maw as more sparks came off it. Oh yeah? We'll see about that. Steve pulled back and changed tactics. He quickly pricked his finger and pressed hard to get a bit of blood smeared on his fingers before grabbing some ingredients from his pouches. Then he dashed back in and touched the arm as it jerked and spasmed a moment before the hand slapped Fenrina, causing her to let out a yelp of surprise and drop it. Ha! Steve exclaimed in victory as he grabbed the arm. No fair! Fenrina huffed. I told you to stop chewing on it anyway! Steve snorted and wagged the arm at her a moment. But when he did that, the arm flailed around a bit. Hey, what? He gasped as it tried to wiggle from his grip, and he began to fight it for control as the hand went wild. Wah! Steve cried out in surprise, as well as the arm came back up and poked him in the eyes. So Nova! He hissed out and dropped the arm to rub at his eyes. It's getting away! Fenrina howled as the arm dropped to the ground and began to scurry away on its skeletal fingers. Larry was closest and made a quick grab for it as he lifted it up, only for it to jerk a bit and latch onto Sherry. The demon looked down at her chest for a moment as the hand felt its way around and then leveled a death glare at Larry. Larry swears on all that he holds dear that he is not making it do that, the dwarf nervously insisted before Sherry smacked the thing away, which let it twist and jerk free of Larry's grip and then land on the tracker globe that Steve had brought them here to see. As it did, it gripped the globe a moment, and there was a flash of light before they could feel a distant rumble. What was that? Fenrina asked as she looked up at the ceiling a moment. Gotcha! Steve, having recovered from the eye-poking, snagged the arm as it tried to jump off the globe. He wrestled with it a moment, and then ripped one of the fingers free, which he quickly stuffed into the chamber on the globe that he needed. The rest of the arm flailed around a moment, and then tried to poke Steve in the eyes once more. Ha! Not this time! Steve countered by blocking his eyes with his hand. The hand was quick to adapt, though, and bonked him on the head instead. Ow! Why, Iata! Steve growled as the hand quickly scurried off into the boxes before he could grab it. Larry, close the door! Fenrina, fan out! We'll surround it! Sherry called out as they began to move deeper into the room, while Larry shut the door to keep the arm locked in with them. Forget it. I got what we need. Let it scurry around in the back for a bit. Steve waved them off as he focused on the globe. He set his hands on it a moment as it began to slowly spin around as lights began to glow across the face of the various landmarks and terrain set on the globe itself. The others clustered around then to watch and see the artifact in action. They could see the spot in Kavika where they knew the old dragon and elephant bones were, but there some other large spots on the map for them to look at. Wow! "What's this big blob here?" Fenrina asked as she pointed to a spot on the north side of the shattered sea within Almarin borders. "That's… I don't know. It used to be part of the Talitian Faradam territory before we conquered it. Just looks like some sort of hidden valley," Steve mused. "There's also spots under the great casinos." He tapped on some more familiar cities not far from the big blob. "The great casinos?" Fenrina asked with confusion as she looked closer at the map. "Yeah, the ancient sunbinders made massive temples and tombs for themselves that over time somehow became more focused on gambling than whatever they were intended for. Maybe they were always for gambling? I don't know. The Talitians are total degenerates anyway. They thought the liver was the most important organ. Drink much?" Steve snorted at the idea. "So now they worship at casinos and try to gamble their way into better afterlives. It's a popular vacation spot despite being in the middle of the desert. Great light shows at night thanks to what sun priests are left." "Hey, look, it's moving." Fenrina pointed at the big blob again and Steve frowned. "What? It can't be. You're looking at it wrong." He insisted, but the others all crowded around and leaned in close to watch the light on the globe. As they watched, the blob shifted. "See?" Fenrina proudly smirked. Steve hummed softly, more concerned with what that might mean than Fenrina's smug victory smirk. "Larry sees another one moving, and it's here," Larry mentioned as he focused on another part of the map. "It's here? Where?" Steve shuffled to the side to see Larry pointing at Arbutus on the globe. There was a much smaller yet much brighter dot on the globe, and it was much more clearly wiggling around. As he saw that, Steve's mind began to quickly try and process what was going on. Then he thought about the nature of the spell he cast on the arm, and the arm that was scurrying around in the room with them somewhere. "Uh-oh," he said as he came to another realization. "Oh no." Sherry sighed at that familiar sound coming from Steve. "What did you do this time?" "Hey, it's Fenrina's fault for not giving up the arm," Steve huffed. Though Fenrina just went to her patented defense, which was to go derp face and look innocent as her tongue hung from the corner of her mouth. "On a scale of 1 to Steve, how bad is this catastrophe you've just started?" Sherry asked as she crossed her arms. "Why is my name on the upper end of the catastrophe scale? I resent that." Steve glared back at her and crossed his arms as well. "I don't know. Maybe because you keep causing catastrophes," Sherry hissed. "It's probably not that bad. I'm sure everyone is overreacting." Steve insisted then with a casual shrug. A second later, however, the door to the room exploded in a shower of wooden splinters as a large one-armed skeleton, covered in runes, and the ornate garb of a pharaoh sunbinder burst in shouting something in ancient Talitian. After a moment, the wiggling emojiglyphs hovering in the air twisted around and re-emerged as common. "All right, fuck boys, who's got my arm?" "Okay. Yeah, this might be a me-level catastrophe," Steve admitted as the others quickly fanned out and faced the threat. "Who's that?" Fenrina asked, as the skeleton with surprisingly thick, bushy black eyebrows glared at them. "I am the Shadowbinder above all, the holder of the darkness, bringer of death and decay, curser of faces, high roller of dice, lord of poker, fucker of crocodiles. I am Scott, king of the dicks." The skeleton answered as it raised its one hand into the air and unleashed a cackle of skeletal laughter. "What was that last part?" Sherry asked with a frown. "Where's that music coming from?" Fenrina also asked as she looked around, hearing a tune in the background that seemed to be playing. She could faintly make out the singers using Scott's name, too. "Do you losers have any idea how angry I am to be woken up and find out all the fleshbinders are dead and I'm left as a fucking skeleton?" Scott ignored their questions as his skull flapped around while he spoke. "Okay, well, your arm is here somewhere." Steve started and then pointed at Scott as he realized something. "Hey, wait! Those are my eyebrows you've got on." "Not anymore, they're not. I'm a skeleton now, so I need these to show the world just how angry I am." The skeleton bellowed as the fuzzy black rectangles angled up sharply to help display his current mood. "Well, I want them back," Steve growled out as he began to grab for ingredients. "Well, I want you to suck my glorious golden dick." The skeleton used his arm to part his robes a moment only to reveal a skeletal pelvis and legs beneath. What? Where did my dick go? Did someone steal the jar with my pickled dick from the tomb? Ooh, I bet it was my weird-ass son, Eddie. All he ever did was mutter about wanting to murder me and fuck his mom. Dick move, Eddie, dick move. The skeleton shook his fist at the ceiling while Steve and the others gave each other some confused looks. Okay, well, that aside, shouldn't you be more grateful I resurrected you? Steve tried, wondering just how hard it would be to re-kill this skeleton. No, Scott doesn't deal in gratitude. I'm pissed that I've lost my gorgeous body and my dick. So I'm declaring war on you and all other fleshies. You shall rue the day you stole my arm from my tomb thief. He pointed an accusatory finger at Steve. I didn't steal anything. I killed some guy for it fair and square. Steve insisted, and then began to muddle some reagents in his hand. Now I'll do the same to you. Ha! Look at your little stupid human fingers trying to make magic work. You can't fool Scott. There aren't any humans capable of wielding magic. There was some rumbling from outside the room then. Oh shit, but she can. This isn't over flesh bags. I will wreak havoc upon your world, Scott hissed. Righty, to me, Scott called out as his missing arm hopped up from its hiding place in the stacks of boxes. Fenrina leaped for it, trying to catch it in her mouth. But the hand turned and slapped her just as she came close, making her yelp and tumble past, before Scott grabbed the arm. He took his time to jam the arm back into his socket and wiggle it around a moment before raising both arms up to the ceiling. Next time we meet, you'll be really boned. Get it? 'Cause I'm a skeleton, and you're fucked, Scott cried out and then vanished in a cloud of black fire as maniacal skeletal laughter clattered all around them. Okay, he might be a dick, but that's a pretty cool teleport, Steve muttered as he carefully began to diffuse the magic he was working on. Steven! He heard the voice from down the hall and sighed as the Archon came into view. She had a swirl of magic around her and looked to be ready for combat. Part of her cosmic body encased in ethereal armor, and she had a staff in her hands that he'd never seen before. The Archon looked around the room a moment, and then focused on Steve as the stars of her eyes dimmed in focus. What did you do? Why do you have to assume it's me, huh? What if it was someone else? Steve asked with a wave of his hands, as he heard more people running up behind the Archon. Was it someone else? She asked. Steve coughed softly. No, it was me. Fenrina was messing around with a fossilized arm I had, and it gave me an idea to use fossils to power up the spell I'm going to use to free Fenrina and the other werehuskies. And, I set a finger into the tracker globe, and I might have, kinda, accidentally revived some long-dead shadowbinder named Scott. Where do I even begin with that? The Archdean sighed and rubbed her face in dismay after Steve caught her up to speed. Stephen rezzed Scott? Stephen, don't you know to beware of Scott? He's a dick! Duskmaw stuck her head around the corner of the door. Then as Steve saw her hands had grown claws, and she was encased in some sort of crystal body armor he'd never seen the likes of before. I mean, Steve stole his arm and he woke up as a skeleton. Maybe he's just a bit grumpy from being woken up. That happens to me sometimes, Fenrina suggested. No, he's a dick. King of the dicks, in fact. I suppose they might have fallen to the Sunbinders before humans were allowed to read in the Talitia, so you might not know about them. The Archon mused a little. Wait, Steve frowned. Are you saying his people are called dicks? That's their name? Yes, the Archon nodded. You've got to be kidding me, Steve scoffed. Their name predates common, though that's where the connotation comes from. Don't you ever wonder about the origin of some of your words? She asked. Honestly, no. Steve shook his head. And I never would have guessed in 1,000 years that there were a group of people named Dicks. But today, I learned, okay, well, between what he said and the globe, some dead fossils are apparently moving. And that's bad, so let's gear up and go crush 'em. He clapped his hands as he tried to get the Archon and Duskmaw to simply follow him and shift the focus off of who caused this in the first place. Not so fast, the Archon growled, seeing right through his ploy. That's an Almarin territory. I can't assist you while the war is on. Oh, come on. Clearly this must go beyond petty squabbles between nations. He's declaring war on all fleshy bois, which I think just means living beings. Certainly that takes priority, Steve insisted. You caused this mess, so you have to fix it. The Archon poked Steve in the chest. Okay, I'll go stop him myself then. How bad can it be? A few dusty old skeletons? We've smashed our way through dungeons full of the undead by this point. Steve stood tall and proud then, as he felt confident in their adventuring experience to get them through this. Scott entombed thousands of soldiers bound to him in dark shadow magic over his lifetime, not to mention all the dead dicks who litter their old home within Void Valley. They were all Jenna, or FGN, so they're likely stronger and larger than any human skeletons, and Scott himself can likely still tap into his own knowledge of the dark arts. The Archon informed him as Steve slowly deflated. Shit, Steve muttered and tried to think over his course of action. Well, the power of shadow ebbs and flows, right? Maybe it won't be so bad. When's the next cycle of dark tides supposed to begin? If I'm lucky, it's ebbing. This month is actually leading up to the strongest point in power for shadows. You're right at the start of their strongest period, the Archon informed him. Well, fuck. I guess I picked the wrong month to fight an army of skeletons. Steve sighed. But we are going to fight them, right? Fenrina asked, with an eager wag of her tail at that, the thought of all those bones to chomp on. Yes, but we're going to need some help. You're finished with that spell we talked about? Steve asked the Archon as he began to rub his chin as he plotted and planned. I did, but you're going to need to find some way to draw him out, and even then I'm not sure how you'll pierce his protective magics. That's magics with a K, the old, more powerful kind, the Archon mentioned next. I just might have a trick up my sleeve. Steve turned back to the globe behind him and opened the compartment to find the long finger left behind. He picked it up and checked its length a moment to make sure he had the finger he thought he did. If Scott's the kind of guy I think he is, I believe I've got a very important finger for him right here, and I can use it to test my ideas on using fossil fuels. I'll set up the perfect trap so when he gets it back, he'll be in for an explosive surprise. Steve grinned as he held the skeletal finger aloft while announcing his plan. Yeah, you're gonna finger bang him, Fenrina cheered. Ugh! Steve immediately groaned out and closed his eyes. Ugh, Fenrina, I had a perfectly cool moment going there and then you ruined it. What? That's what you're going to do, right? You're going to make his finger go bang on him. You're going to finger bang him, she reiterated. Stop! Steve groaned and rubbed his free hand over his face. Why? Is your plan not to finger bang him? 'Cause the way you explained it made it sound like you were going to finger bang Scott. She gave everyone the derp face as she tried to figure out why they were all cringing at her explanation. No, I am not going to finger bang Scott. Stop saying that. We're going to fight a skeleton army in an epic display of combat and magic. That's it. No finger banging, Steve insisted with a huff. While Steve and the other members of Doom would indeed have a most fateful and historic battle with an army of skeletons, there was some truth to Fenrina's claims. For little did Steve know that he would indeed finger bang Scott. However, that is a story for another time,